All right, folks, we're going to do one last call. We're going to get started on our forum. Please come into the multi-purpose space. Okay, folks, we're going to get ourselves started. We're so glad that you all are here. And Tiffany, do you mind closing that door? And then what we're going to do is Roy's going to talk for about half an hour, and then, or maybe less. Then what we'll do is open it up to Q&A. And I have a mic, and somebody else will have a mic, and be running around to make sure that you all are heard. And the reason is this, we tape everything, and we're going to be taping this because, as you know, part of our congregation is not here today, and that's just the reality of religious believing and belonging these days, and they want to see these things, but they want to see them when they have the time. So we're going to do that. So the reason why we run to you with the mic is not because we're trying to lift up your voice particularly or control you by pulling the mic away. It's to record the question so that people at home watching can get what they want to say. So without further ado, I think you've all heard his story, but would you welcome with me Roy Cockrum?
Hi. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here in such an amazing community. I had never heard of Cranbrook. I'd never heard of Cranbrook. I didn't know what you did here. I am so impressed with the kind of creative community that you live in and work in and support here. And I encourage you to keep up the good work. It's unique. It is not the kind of community that exists in every community across America. It's the kind of community that only exists by absolute intention and by the people who live here supporting it and keeping ongoing support for the kind of work that happens here. Whether it's the museum or the schools or the arts collections in general or the arts workshops, the kind of meetings, the kind of meeting we had yesterday, where a lot of leaders, creative leaders from around the community got together and talked about the creative life of this community. I think it's just swell to see this happening here, and I encourage you to keep doing it. I am going to tell you one more story. I left out a few pieces of information in the stories I've told so far. I'm going to tell myself right quick with a story about the day I won the lottery. I said in the sermon earlier that I had appointments for my mom that day, medical appointments, and I was just checking the number right quick before I ran out the door to go pick her up, to take her to several doctor's offices. And so I checked the number. I realized what had happened. I fell to my knees. I collected myself, and she had appointments. I had to go pick her up. I had to go collect her. So I went and got the in the car and went and picked up Mom and went over to the University of Tennessee Medical Center. Oh, by the way, the live ticket was in my pocket. It was in my wallet and in my pocket all that morning, and I was running around taking Mom to doctor's office after doctor's office. And we had a routine where when she was done with all of her appointments, I would take her. She had limited mobility at the time. She was 87 at the time, 88. And I would take her out to a park bench that was right outside the door. If the weather was nice, she liked sitting outside, so I would go and put her on the park bench and then go the long distance to the parking garage and get the car and then come back round and collect her. And that was our routine. And so I put her on the park bench and I went and got in the car and I went and got on the highway and went across the bridge and was halfway home before I realized I'd forgotten to pick her up. I was just a little distracted. So it's really easy to be overwhelmed by a tsunami of cash. And how one starts beginning to think about that and process that is going to overwhelm everyone. A lot of people choose to use it on hookers and cocaine. That's an option. That was not what my choice was, but that's what a lot of people. In fact, there was a guy who won almost exactly the same amount of money as I did in Kentucky just a few years before I did, and he had replaced every junk car in his yard with a Maserati or a big, fancy sports cars, but they were parked in exactly the same places. And he was dead in 2 years. I mean, literally, it was sad, terrible story. His daughter OD'd and he OD'd, and it was just, that's what happens if somehow you haven't, unless you've lived under a vow of poverty and understand how powerful money can be, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by it. So I thank God every day that I somehow, by the inspiration I talked about this morning, or just by my life experience, or by my friends, or by my good advice, over the course of the last 10 years, so far, everything's going just peachy. So my foundation is due to expire in 89 years. And the reason for that is I got the advice when we were setting up the foundation that it should expire after 99 years. It's just, it's a good idea to avoid what has become known in Father Bill probably has heard of the Buggy Whip Foundation in Boston. A church there had a Buggy Whip Foundation started in the 19th century that was for the exclusive use of buggy whips. And they can't break it. So it's been accumulating for more than 100 years, well, more than 150 years now, I guess, but it's been a really long time, and they can't touch it. So, because it was the way it was defined, they can't use the money any other way. Anyway, that may be apocryphal, but I think it's true. And so if you have a foundation expire after 99 years, I won't be around anymore, so they can decide something else really good to do with the money when I'm gone. Those are the stories I usually tell. I talk about you've heard why I did the foundation. I will say that I would not have started the Roy Cockrum Foundation without the help of somebody by the name of Benita Hofstetter-Coleman, who we were apprentices at Actors Theater of Louisville in the 70s. And she worked her whole life in the theater. She was a person of the theater, a person with passion for the theater. And she had continued her work and connection to the theater through the NEA and through production in Washington and casting and other things. So I knew she knew everybody in the business. So I had somebody to call that might be interested in helping me do that. And when I called her and I said, she's the one I called and said, something's happened. I have an idea. I'm sending a plane for you. She didn't believe me, but she got the email with the tail number and had to go get on the plane. So she came to Knoxville, and she and my attorney that I mentioned before, and I sat in a restaurant and started planning and started saying what's possible, what's not. But if Benita hadn't been willing to join me, be a partner in that, I probably wouldn't have done it because I didn't have the connections, I didn't have the knowledge. So I'm very grateful to her. Turns out she had been standing in line at a grocery store or a gas station a few weeks before I won the lottery to buy a lottery ticket. And while she was standing in line, somebody asked her, if you win, what are you going to do with the money? And she said, I'll probably start a foundation to help American theaters. Kind of meant to be, kind of meant to be. So sometimes things just work out, and we need to trust that sometimes things will just work out. I didn't use the light and love of God today, but I feel and experience. Sorry.
It's okay.
I feel and experience the light and love of God, not from my accounts, but from the people with whom I have made so many connections and who have been so supportive and so helpful in this journey. So, anyway, it's been a long weekend. She's been working me to death. But, I get question time.
Yeah,
Is that enough?
I think that's enough.
Do you want me to say something else?
No, I think that the reason why I like this, and first of all, thank you for the generosity of your time. And Roy was surprised when I paid for dinner on Friday night, but what he had to realize is that was his honorarium. So that was
that and a cutting board.
And a cutting board, yes, I've got that for you. One of Claire's cutting boards. So that actually is a pretty good gift.
That's a great gift.
Yeah, yes. I want to structure this, and we always have to structure questions. I know a lot of you are going to have questions, and we're going to just bundle them a little bit, and then see if we can catch some themes. And some of the themes I know you want to talk about is how the thing that I get amazed by is that there are many people who win the lottery, but not many people find their way through to actually starting a foundation, right? There's a lot of good intentions when people win the lottery, but they don't always get there. And so I know that if you can ask some questions around that theme, like how do you move into that space? Because that actually applies to all of us. It doesn't have to, we don't have to be millionaires to actually move into that space. And then others I know have questions about the arts. And so we'll just bundle questions around that. And then some of you will have questions about God. One of the things I was saying to Roy, because he and I shared that connection to that monastery, I have not brought any representatives of the monastic life to Christ Church Cranbrook. I've always been careful about that, because sometimes when people come into a space, they bring a monk, and honestly, people don't know what to do with that. And we are actually in an interesting space as a congregation where that contemplation and that action of being a monastic could teach us a lot. We have hit this kind of ferment spiritually as a congregation. So I think I'd throw that open. So who wants to talk about money and execution and things like that? Who has a question about that? Okay, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you say a little bit about the mission of your foundation and some examples of things you've made possible.
And then we'll just do another, and then Carl? Chris?
How did you handle probably the barrage of people, once they learned that you had got some money, that they came knocking on your door and figure out who you're going to talk to and not talk to?
And then Patrick?
I'm more curious about living a vow of poverty for 20 years and what that's all about. And was this a Catholic monastery?
No, it was
Episcopal?
Episcopal.
Oh, okay.
Great. All right, let's take
Yeah,
those three.
little best kept secret of the Episcopal Church is that there is a monastic there are monastic communities throughout the Episcopal Church, and I encourage you to seek them out and utilize them. They're a great resource. Communities of prayer and faith that offer retreats and direction and can be very, very, well, it changed my life when I went on one retreat and got hooked. It's important to remember that it's there, and I'm happy to serve as bridge monk to start to introduce the monastic and
That'd be
monastic
lovely.
life.
That'd be lovely. We will take you up on that. Yeah, no, this would be wonderful.
As far as we have a very specific, one of the things we did right is to have a very specific mission for the foundation. I wrote it and then rewrote it with the early people who were involved, and then rewrote it again with a full board when everything came together. And I found that the more specific it is, the better it is for us. That means we're able to focus on exactly what we do, and when we go astray, we have boundaries that will help us get back on track. So our mission is to support professional, not-for-profit theaters to do world-class work that they dream of doing in America. And that's it. That's our mission. And that's very specific. I can define professional theater for you as a theater that has a certain kind of contract that they employ actors with, or whether or not they have a paid staff or a physical home. There are ways of understanding what a professional theater is. Not-for-profit speaks for itself. We do not do commercial work. And we often turn down things that we know, even though it's presented to us by a nonprofit theater, we'll turn it down if it's something that a commercial producer is obviously going to pick up anyway. That's something we're not interested in getting a Broadway hit every time we give a grant. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the project that they couldn't get support from commercial producers for that will step in and help elevate. As I said at the meeting yesterday, as I started the meeting yesterday, we have a motto. We have a mission and a motto. The motto is a quote from Albert Camus, which is, "Without culture and the freedom it implies, society, even when perfect, is but a jungle. This is why any authentic creation is a gift to the future." That's our motto. And so when I go see a Shakespeare play, as I've done a lot we sponsored 2 massive Shakespeare marathons, one at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis and one at the Old Globe in San Diego this year. So I've seen a lot of Shakespeare. And I'm very aware of the 420 plus year gift that Shakespeare gave us. Man, that's important. That is so important and continues to be a gift, continues over and over and over again. And we don't know what gifts we're helping create that are going to last into the future. We can't know. Nobody can see the future. As you know, it's a very Advent kind of thing. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can help the ones that have prospects really elevate themselves in a way that is important. As far as choosing how to filter people, that's an all-afternoon conversation because You're right. I do have to filter contacts that come our way. The professional contacts are filtered through our executive director, Carol Ann Lee, who worked for many years with the National Endowment for the Arts. And she knows everybody in town, and it's just lovely. I can't get through the day without her. So to have someone in place to handle that professionally. As far as personally, I have a lot of cousins I didn't know I had. A whole lot of cousins. And people I haven't talked to, yes, people I didn't talk to since, college or high school do appear, and they show up. And then there's a dark side to it, because to this day, millions of texts and emails and LinkedIn messages and Facebook messages with my name, my image, my mission, my story. Brother Roy wants to give you $350,000. Go out every day, millions of them. And I've been in touch with the FBI, I've tried advertising, and I've done everything I can to put warnings up. But it's just an ongoing nuisance and shame. I'm not hurt by it, really, but I know other people are. And people have filed consumer complaints against me because they didn't get their $350,000. And I told Father Bill a story yesterday. This poor woman spent her last $30 on a bus ticket to come from Vermont to my office in Knoxville, Tennessee, in her dirty sweatpants, because she was there to collect her $350,000. And so, there is a dark side to any public presence, I can't really complain, though. I mean, honestly, the worst things in the world than having to put up with what are essentially, I hate it if other people get hurt, but if it's just an annoyance to me, there's not much I can say about it.
So we just did basically the money and mission and a bit of the monasticism. Do we want to move to arts? Are there questions around the arts? Okay, I've got 3. Let's go with those. Chris?
Hi, I'm not sure we covered the vow of poverty part.
Oh, sorry.
So I want to go deep. Can you go deep on that?
All
Like,
right.
why?
Yes.
Then-
Meanwhile, back in the monastery,
Yeah.
You gave us a great description of the play you saw that got you excited about all the things that could be done. So I wondered, once you started your organization, can you tell us about some of the things you sponsored that were really wonderful?
be happy to.
And then Margaret. Oh, you have some.
I have one.
Click the little click up. There you go. Click. It's like Pez.
So if you have a group, an artist group, how do they apply to your foundation? Do they go to the website? Do they have a phone call? How do they do it?
I take the last first. It's by invitation only. We have to do it that way. Otherwise, we're inundated by every community theater in America. So we know who's who, basically, in the American theater community. So we invite known entities, usually, and we get to know new people a lot. And we're gonna, there are new theaters that we go visit all the time, but we need to see their work. We need to know what they do, and we need to know that they're the real deal before we invite them to apply. Poverty, the vows of monastic life are, well, you have the best story about it. I mean,
Yeah.
you should tell the not story.
Well, they tell the not story one more time. I don't know if you were in church when I did this in a sermon the other day, but Kevin Hackett and Roy Cockrum and I were doing this retreat with the youth, and we hadn't talked beforehand, so we put about 20 youth in a circle, and we're sitting there, and they're in their habits, and I'm in my collar, and it's just it's like that hot day in Tennessee, like, you know, and there's like absolutely no air conditioning in the house we were in. We're just like, oh, and they were just miserable. The kids were miserable. And Roy picked up his cincher and he said, you know, we're not really here to tell you anything. We're here to listen. And we have these knots on our cinctures. That's the rope that goes around. And they stand for poverty, chastity, and obedience. And another way of saying those words is money, sex, and power. And your answer to those three powers in your life reveals a lot about who you are and who you are in God. So we're here to listen. And we're here to talk about those things, those powers, or anything else you want to talk about. And then they just set up a sign-up sheet for conversations. And it was filled immediately. They all poured their hearts out to them. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've seen of how we always want to engage the youth. We always want to make an impact on the youth. And I think everybody who ever has worked in the church has been guilty of trying too hard. And instead, by creating the receptivity to listen, is such an incredibly important gift for them.
And as far as the practicality of living under a vow of poverty, I wasn't poor. I lived in a castle on the Charles River in downtown Cambridge. It was a monk's cell, but it was in a castle, you know, and the monastery there is gorgeous and a lovely location. $1 million apartments, you know.
Yeah, but you also,
Right next door.
Your spending money for 2 weeks was $75?
No, every week we got $75. That was our.
So.
That's what we could spend on, that was our cheeseburger and movie money. But we never had to worry about a meal. We never had to worry about rent. We never had to worry about medical care. I was rich compared to what I had been as a starving actor in New York, living under a vow of poverty. Everything's relative. I mean, you know, I traveled the world as a monk under a vow of poverty. I traveled the world and saw things I would never see any other way, and had experiences I couldn't have bought. So I don't know how you put all that on a scale. It was valuable in understanding, though, in that exercise, that money has power. And that money can really be ruinous to a lot of people, and to be able to have some kind of perspective on how money works in the world was why living under a vow of poverty helped prepare me to win the lottery. And the other question.
Well, I think John had a question about some examples that you're really proud of.
Well, here's what we did. We set up an appointment with Bob Falls, who was the artistic director of the Goodman Theater in Chicago. He was our first visit, our first phone call. We had lunch with him, and we went, and after a short conversation, I did what I have come to, what the board says, pop the question. Roy's going to pop the question. And so I said, Bob, is there anything you've ever dreamed of doing that you just assumed you couldn't afford? And he burst into tears. And turns out he had an option. He had the English rights to a Chilean novel, Bolaño novel called 2666, that if he didn't get it produced that season, he was going to lose the English-speaking rights. And so we were young and small and nimble. We took an application and made the grant the next week so that they could go into production on that enormous 4-hour adaptation of the novel 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. That was our first grant. And that's followed that pattern pretty much throughout. We were, for a while, doing swan songs a lot. A lot of artistic directors, as it happens over the last 10 years, have retired. So Michael Kahn at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, I popped the question with him, and he also burst into tears. And he said he wanted to do, Agamemnon as his big finale. something that the board refused to pay for at the Shakespeare Theater. It's an enormous task. So anyway, we've done a lot of projects along those lines. The two this year, the two Shakespeare pieces were a Shakespeare marathon, War of the Roses marathon at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis last spring, that combined 4 of the Henrys and Richard V and Henry V. Anyway, I don't know. It was an all-day, 3-performance all-day marathon that started at 10 in the morning and went till midnight, that people really seemed to enjoy doing. So, and then the Henry VIs we did it at the Guthrie, at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego this summer. That was our last pre-pandemic grant. They had been doing workshops trying to put these 3 plays, combine 3 plays into 2, to help them complete the Shakespeare canon, which they were trying to do. And so we thought that was a worthy project, so we wanted to help them do that. But it meant giving them, they would have to stop because of the pandemic or try to work, over the internet. And it was, so we ended up supplementing our original grant to help them get it over the hump and get to production. Production is the key. We want to help make things happen. That's what we're trying to do. So,
Roy, we have one more question on this topic of the arts from somebody who knows something of the arts.
Hi.
Hi.
Once an actor, always an
My
actor.
new friend.
Very good friend. Once an actor, always an actor. My question is twofold. One, do you miss it? And do you ever do any of this again? And second, as an actor, obviously it's clear why you wanted to support theater, but can you speak to why theater is important and why it matters so much in our society?
Well, I would go back to the Camus quote for why it's important. I think that, I think society gets stale and gets single-minded when not challenged on a regular basis by the arts. I believe that. And I think that without the challenges that come from the voices in the arts community, a lot of change in society won't happen, and it gets stale. So that's why the arts are important. And I would say it's not just the theater, it's opera, it's all performing arts, certainly, and all art forms. But the performing arts are so critical to the vitality of a community. And you don't know it until it's gone. You don't really understand why it's important until you've let it slip away. And then you have to start building up again from the school groups to community theater, and you have to literally start all over again to build audiences to the point where they're receptive to the work that a theater can do. Audience development is so important. And the big theaters, the big institutions, the big performing arts institutions in the country know that and are laser focused on making sure their audiences are included. And this project in San Diego this summer, the artistic director says he included nearly 100,000 San Diegans in that production in one way or another, and doing workshops or playing small parts or singing in choirs that got recorded and used in the production. Or he was really building a community through that production that was really important. As for me, I'm an old man now. And honestly, 8 a week, which is what I did for many, many, many years, and I'm very proud of that. I got my $314 a month Actors Equity pension. Thank you very much. Very proud of that. It's harder to do than you know. But work in the theater is a kid's game. There are exceptions to that, of course, but if you're really trying to do a full Broadway or regional theater contract, you're working really hard, and it's physically taxing, and it's more than I want to do right now.
fewer performances in opera, so you're welcome.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm a pretty good singer, so, you know.
Okay, this question is actually on behalf of my friend Christine. Can you name that play that you did 8 shows a week of and earned your equity?
Oh, I did lots of plays for 8
Okay,
shows a week.
but
Sarah wants you to say.
this is on behalf of
Sarah
Christine,
wants
who
you to
did
say,
not want to
So
ask
the name
it.
of the play, folks. This is, you know, Sarah, these are Episcopalians. They're going to take this really
well.
non-reactively. It's known as the Vampire Lesbians of Sodom. Yes, and he
It's
had
a
a
good
key role.
show.
And Al, we all remember that play, right? It was no.
I
okay,
got
yeah.
to see
And
Roy
the
in
Tokyo
this play.
tour.
I got to see this man in this play many years ago. I actually have a question about the foundation as it relates to other foundations. One of the things that I learned last year was that regional theaters across the country last year were closing at a rate of 1 a week.
That's correct.
So it is what you were just talking about the Camus quote and the importance of the arts, and in particular the performing arts, we're at a national crisis of losing gems of communities. And I have a question for you as a leader of a foundation that right now has a lot of kind of national focus. Are you part of a consortium of other foundations? Are you in conversation with other foundation leaders advocating in particular for theater and in particular for the performing arts? And is there such a consortium where your voice could be heard?
There's not, no, is the answer. However, anyone who's involved in the field right now knows what's going on. And we're all very keenly aware of the desperate circumstances of some theaters, not all.
Not all.
A lot of theaters are going away, and we can't stop that. I don't have enough money to stop that.
No,
So, does the Schubert Foundation have enough money? I don't know. Does the Ford Foundation have enough money? I don't know. It's everybody's aware of what's going on, and how people choose to address it, it really varies from mission to mission, really.
Yeah.
As far as organizing against it, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to having a conversation with anybody, but I don't know to what end.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know theaters nationwide are kind of combining to
Well, there are national theater groups, TCG.
And working on the problem. So I was wondering if there was
that have their own issues, but we have I don't know. It's so complicated. It's a complicated. Theater's always been complicated. You know, since the Greeks were doing it, it's been, and it was all about religion and sacrifice. You know, so.
You say that like it's a bad thing. That's like, got my attention. We have a question over here, David.
Are there any great,
Wait, we gotta wait for this.
Are there any great Shakespearean actors today?
Yes.
Yeah, name them.
I'm not going to name them, but yes.
Yeah.
I've seen, again, it depends on the context. You know, we just saw a production at the ART in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as a matter of fact. I went back and said hi to the brothers while I was in town, of Romeo and Juliet. And the leads were all these young TV guys and girls that I didn't know very well at all, and they did a bang-up job. It was a wonderful production. So is that person a great Shakespearean actor? Well, he was in that production. I don't know whether he has the training and experience for that to carry over to anything else or a long career as a Shakespearean actor, but in that production he was terrific, and she was terrific. And all the other parts around, Mercutio was amazing. And they had fights that I've never seen, the complexity and danger in swordplay on stage that they had in that production. And it was just beautifully staged. We're meeting with the artistic director next week to see if she has any so I can pop the question. So I find it hard to answer questions that specific about people's skills because it really varies from production to production.
I find that charming because what it does is it doesn't let us get sucked into one person dominating the field. So we have two, Christopher and then Barry.
Hi,
And
Christopher.
then Nate. We're going to go this way. 1, 2, 3.
Yes, this is a question about the inspiration that you had. Was that a one and done kind of thing, and then it occurred to you that many years later when you won? Was that, how did that connect? Was it something that you had thought about over the years before winning, or did it just instantly come back to you?
There was no way I could have ever imagined it possible for me to do that. So the instant that it was possible for me to do that, the idea was present. So I guess the answer is it had been present with me the whole time, but there's no way I paid attention to it. There's no reason to pay attention to it. No reason for me to understand it. I don't think it must obviously never faded because it was at hand literally the instant that the possibility actually existed when it became real. So.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cockrum and everyone. Going to Father Bill's third category for God. Obviously, you've been very successful. My question is, how have you been able to own that success and all of the recognition you've had while also honoring and recognizing God that allows you to have continued growth?
Well, this is my first time preaching in 20 years. So
Hopefully not your last.
you're the first invitation I've had. I'm not a minister. I'm not a pastor. I'm not an evangelist. I was a member of an organization called St. John the Evangelist, but some people are called to that life and some people aren't. I'm not an evangelist. I'm happy, if anybody wants to have a conversation about God, I'm available. And I have some facility having that conversation. The last time I preached was at my mother's funeral, and I think I did a pretty good job and talked about the light and love of God that shone through her. But in terms of, it's just frankly not a priority for me or I'm not called to the mission of bringing God to my work or to the work of people that we support. It's up to them to have that journey on their own. And I do believe that people's spiritual journeys are very personal. And part of that is my upbringing in the Southern Baptist Church, where it was not personal and sort of enforced. And I rebel against that pretty strongly. What was the other question?
I think you answered it. Yeah. All right. You've said you felt theatre is important because it influences society.
Correct.
When you're ready to sponsor a theatre, does it depend on what message they're getting over, and how do you get to the audience that you're aiming at?
It's not the message that they're proposing. It's whether or not there is a message that we look for. We want to. If it may not mean much to me, or might not be a social view or political view that I personally hold, that a project will be putting forth. But if they're dedicated to it and passionate about bringing it up, we'll consider supporting it. If an experienced theater person like Bob Falls, I've used his name 100 times this weekend, but if somebody I know and trust who is a theater person comes to me with a project, I'm going to take it very seriously, because whether I agree with it or not. There are plays that I read just this week that I just hate by well-known playwrights. I don't know if we're going to support them or not, but whether or not I like it really isn't the point. It's whether or not the artists are passionate about it and feel that it's important to bring it forward.
Something that.
And then the audience?
Audience reaction isn't on my list of priorities. Because we're not commercial theaters. I assume that good theater will have an impact. That's my assumption. If we do, if,
Do you take Shakespeare to the kids or to the old people?
yes. We take Shakespeare to the kids, to the old people, to anybody. If a theater has a plan for a particular production that they're passionate about, we'll consider supporting it.
And just to cap that, what Roy said on different occasions when we've talked is the success of his grant is opening night and not the reviews or even how well the production does. It's opening night. It's getting that across.
It's the fact of the production that that's our level of, that's how we judge success. Did it happen? Did it happen the way the artist had planned it, the way they had hoped for, the way they dreamed of? If it did, and it's a big flop, and the audiences boo, it's no interest to me. Well, I'd be kind of interested, I guess, but
a strong reaction might, that would be.
A strong reaction might get our attention, but the way we judge success is, did it happen? And not what did the critics like it, or did it sell a lot of tickets? And because that's what commercial theater is.
We're going to close with that because it's 12:30 and I've had Roy going since 7:15, and he said to me last night, I'm not a monastic anymore. At 7:15, I'm a theater person now, so 7:15 is super early for me. And I also want to say, how foolish of the church to not reach out to have you preach. And we were so blessed by your sermon today, and it was so on point. It was so beautiful, and we're so blessed by the work you do. And I was thinking, because I am a nerd, I was thinking about Origen, who's my favorite heretic, and also father of the church. He managed to do both. Mm-hmm. And Origen has this idea that the love of God shown to us is distinct from the love that God shows anything else, even God. God's love for Christ and God's love for us, he writes, is philanthropia. That's the love of the human. And what I love about that is that's the root, of course, to philanthropy. So there is a kind of incarnational logic in any act of philanthropy. There's a philanthropia, there's a love of the human. And it goes with the grain of our faith. So for being such a witness.
And I'll just add, I was on the front page of the Times in September not because I won the lottery. When I won the lottery, I was nowhere in the Times. I was on the front page of the Times because of the work the Foundation's done over 10 years and how unusual that is.
Yeah, join us, yes. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. That's our show.